The blood on her split lips had long since dried to a dark crust when Willa Garrison finally accepted she was going to die in the Escalante Desert with nothing but the relentless Utah sun as her witness. 3 days ago, she had been riding alongside the wagon train, a respectable school teacher from Missouri heading west to start fresh in California. And now she lay curled beneath a scraggly juniper that provided no shade worth mentioning, her tongue so swollen she could barely draw breath past it. The men had taken everything: her horse, her water, her trunk with all her worldly possessions, even the small derringer her father had given her before consumption took him, and they had laughed while doing it, their leader spitting tobacco juice near her feet before they rode off into the shimmering heat. She had screamed after them until her voice gave out. She had wept until no more tears would come. Then she had started walking, because dying while moving seemed somehow better than dying while still. But the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, and soon she could no longer remember which way the wagon train had gone or which way led to anything resembling civilization. The irony burned worse than her sun-blistered skin. She had left St. Louis to escape the suffocating marriage proposals from men twice her age who saw her as nothing more than a solution to their domestic needs. At 22, Willa had wanted adventure, purpose, the chance to educate children on the frontier where teachers were desperately needed. Her mother had warned her. Her sister had called her foolish. But Willa had been so certain, so convinced that she was making the right choice, and now she would die proving them right about her foolishness. The sun was setting on what she believed to be her third day alone when she heard the sound. At first she thought it was another hallucination. She had been seeing water where there was none, trees that vanished when she approached, even her father's face swimming in the heat waves. But this sound persisted. Hoofbeats. Real hoofbeats. Steady and deliberate. Not the frantic thunder of the outlaws who had left her here, but the measured pace of someone tracking something. Willa tried to call out, but her throat produced only a pathetic croak. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled immediately. So she did the only thing she could. She dragged herself out from under the juniper into the open sand where she might be seen, and then she lay there, waiting for either rescue or death, no longer particular about which came first. Nathan Aldridge had been tracking the men for 2 days before he found the place where they had dumped the woman. He was a federal marshal, though he did not wear the badge openly out here where it might make him a target before he was ready. At 26, he had already seen enough of humanity's cruelty to last several lifetimes, but the tracks told a story that made his jaw tighten with fury. A woman's smaller boot prints, staggering at first, then scuffed where she had fallen, then dragging in places where she had crawled. The trail was nearly gone another day, and the wind would have erased it completely, but Nathan had learned tracking from a Paiute guide who could read the desert like other men read books. He followed the tracks through the afternoon, his bay gelding picking its way carefully through the rocky terrain. Nathan had been on his way back to Circleville after delivering a prisoner to the territorial prison in Salt Lake City when he had encountered the wagon train. They had told him about the school teacher who had vanished 3 nights prior, how they had searched for her but found nothing, how they assumed she had wandered off and met with some misfortune. The wagon master had seemed genuinely distressed, but Nathan had learned long ago that appearances meant little. Still, he had taken the direction they had last seen her and started searching, more out of habit than hope. The sun was touching the horizon when he spotted the dark shape in the open sand. His first thought was that he was too late, that he was looking at a corpse. But then the shape moved slightly, and Nathan spurred his horse forward, already reaching for his canteen. Willa heard the hoofbeats grow louder, felt the shadow fall across her, and then there were hands gentle but strong turning her over. A man's face swam into view, and even through her blurred vision, she could see the concern etched in his features. He had dark hair and eyes the color of aged whiskey, and when he lifted her head and pressed a canteen to her cracked lips, she thought perhaps she had died after all, and this was some merciful hallucination her mind had conjured for her final moments. "Easy," the man said, his voice deep and steady. "And no, Just small sips. I know you want to gulp it, but you'll make yourself sick." The water was the most glorious thing Willa had ever tasted. She wanted to grab the canteen and drain it, but the man controlled the flow, giving her just enough to wet her mouth and throat without overwhelming her system. After a few moments, he pulled the canteen away despite her weak protest. "More in a minute," he promised. "Let that settle first." He set the canteen aside and examined her with a practiced eye, noting the sunburn, the cracked lips, the way her skin felt papery and hot under his fingers. "Can you tell me your name?" "Willa," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Willa Garrison." "Nathan Aldridge," he replied. "I am going to lift you now, Miss Garrison. We need to get you somewhere with proper shelter." She wanted to tell him about the men, about how they had circled her like wolves while the wagon train slept, how they had threatened far worse than abandonment if she screamed, how they had taken everything from her and laughed while doing it. But the words would not come, and then Nathan was lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all, and the movement combined with the water in her empty stomach made everything spin. She came back to herself in stages. First there was the awareness of motion, of being held against something solid and warm. Then there was the sound of hoofbeats again, steady and constant. Finally, she managed to open her eyes and found herself cradled against Nathan's chest, his arms holding her securely while he guided his horse with subtle shifts of his body. "Where?" she croaked. "There is a ranch about 5 miles from here," Nathan said, adjusting his hold on her slightly. "Family called the Hendersons. They are good people. They will help." Willa tried to process this information, but exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. She let her head rest against Nathan's chest, dimly aware of his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, and allowed herself to drift. For the first time in 3 days, she felt something other than despair. She felt safe. The Henderson Ranch appeared as the last light was fading from the sky. It was a modest operation, a main house, a barn, a few outbuildings, but to Willa it looked like paradise. Nathan's call brought people spilling from the house, and suddenly there were women's voices, soft and concerned, and she was being transferred into other arms, carried into the house, laid on something blessedly soft. Martha Henderson was a sturdy woman in her 50s with capable hands and kind eyes. She took one look at Willa and immediately began issuing orders to her daughters. "Emma, fetch the good water. Sarah, get me the salve and clean cloths. Tom, you help Marshal Aldridge with his horse." So he was a marshal. Willa filed that information away as Martha began carefully removing her ruined dress. The fabric stuck to her burned skin in places, and Willa could not suppress a whimper when Martha had to peel it away. "I know, sweetheart," Martha murmured. "I know it hurts, but we will get you fixed up. You are safe now." Over the next hour, Martha and her daughters cleaned Willa's burns, applied cooling salve, and coaxed small amounts of broth and water into her. By the time they had finished and tucked her into a clean nightgown in the spare bedroom, Willa was barely conscious, but she fought against sleep long enough to whisper, "The marshal?" "He's right outside," Martha assured her. "Not going anywhere. You rest now." Nathan was indeed right outside, sitting at the Hendersons' kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee and trying not to think about what would have happened if he had started his search a day later. The tracks would have been gone. He never would have found her. She would have died alone in the desert, and no one would have known what happened to the schoolteacher from Missouri. "She was lucky you came along," Martha said, joining him at the table with her own cup. "Another day, and it would have been too late." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Nathan replied grimly. "This was deliberate. Someone left her out there to die." Martha's expression hardened. "The men from the wagon train?" "That is what I intend to find out." Nathan took a long drink of his coffee. "Once she is strong enough to talk, I will need to ask her some questions." "Give her a few days," Martha said firmly. "She is in a bad way, Marshal. Sunstroke, dehydration, exposure. Her body needs time to recover." Nathan nodded, though everything in him wanted to ride out immediately and start hunting the men responsible. But Martha was right. Willa needed time, and he needed information. Riding off in the wrong direction would accomplish nothing. He stayed at the Henderson ranch that night, sleeping in the barn, despite Martha's offer of a proper bed. He was up before dawn, checking on his horse and gear, considering his next moves. He could ride back to Circleville, report what he had found, organize a proper search party, but that would take time, and the men who had done this were getting farther away with every hour that passed. He was still weighing his options when Emma Henderson came to fetch him for breakfast. Inside the house, Martha was frying eggs and bacon, while her husband Tom read from a well-worn Bible at the head of the table. It was a peaceful domestic scene, and Nathan felt an unexpected pang of something that might have been longing. He had lived alone for so long, moving from town to town, case to case, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be part of something like this. "How is she?" he asked Martha as he took a seat. "Resting," Martha replied, sliding eggs onto a plate. "She woke up once around midnight, disoriented. I gave her more water and broth, and she went right back to sleep. That is, good sleep is what she needs most right now." Nathan ate his breakfast mechanically, his mind already racing ahead to what came next. He would need to question Willa thoroughly about the men who had abandoned her. Descriptions, names, if she had heard any, anything that might help him track them down. Men who would do something like this did not stop at one victim. They would strike again, and soon. It was late afternoon before Willa truly woke, her mind clear for the first time in days. She found herself in a small, clean bedroom with cheerful yellow curtains and a quilt that smelled of lavender. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was back home in St. Louis, that the entire journey west had been a terrible dream. Then she tried to sit up, and pain lanced through every inch of her sun-damaged skin, and it all came flooding back. The door opened softly, and a young woman with Martha's kind eyes peered in. "Oh, good, you're awake. I am Sarah. How are you feeling?" "Like I was dragged behind a stagecoach," Willa admitted, her voice still rough but stronger than before. "Where am I?" "Henderson Ranch, about 15 miles south of Circleville," Sarah said, coming in with a tray bearing more broth and water. "Marshal Aldridge found you in the desert 2 days ago. Do you remember?" 2 days. Willa's mind reeled. She had lost 2 entire days to fever and exhaustion. "I remember him giving me water," she said slowly, "and bringing me here." "He has been asking after you," Sarah said carefully, helping Willa sit up enough to drink. "Wants to talk to you about what happened when you were feeling up to it." Willa's hands trembled slightly as she took the cup of broth. "The men who left me. The marshal will catch them," Sarah said with certainty. "He's the best tracker in the territory, and he does not let outlaws get away. But first you need to get your strength back." Over the next 3 days, Willa slowly recovered. The burns faded from angry red to tender pink. Her cracked lips healed. She could keep down solid food and walk around the room without feeling dizzy. Martha Henderson proved to be a skilled nurse and a warm presence, never pushing Willa to talk about her ordeal, but always ready to listen when she needed to. Nathan visited each day, usually in the early evening after he had finished whatever work Tom Henderson needed done around the ranch. He never stayed long or pushed Willa to talk about what had happened, but his presence was oddly comforting. There was something solid and dependable about him, a quiet competence that made Willa feel safe in a way she had not felt since leaving St. Louis. On the 4th day, she finally felt strong enough to face the questions she knew were coming. She found Nathan in the yard helping Tom repair a section of fence and watched him work for a moment before approaching. He had removed his jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves, and Willa could see the lean muscles of his forearms flexing as he hammered. There was something appealing about the way he moved, economical and purposeful, and Willa felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her recent ordeal. He looked up and saw her, and something that might have been relief crossed his face. "Miss Garrison, it is good to see you up and about." "I wanted to thank you," Willa said, approaching the fence, "for finding me, for saving my life." "No thanks necessary," Nathan replied, setting down his hammer. Just doing my job. Still. Willa twisted her hands together nervously. I know you have questions about what happened. I am ready to answer them if you want to talk now. Nathan glanced at Tom, who nodded and moved off to give them privacy. Then he turned his full attention to Willa, and she found herself caught by the intensity of his gaze. His eyes were deeply observant, missing nothing, but there was compassion there too. Why don't we sit in the shade, he suggested, gesturing toward a bench under a cottonwood tree, and you can take your time. Start from the beginning. So Willa told him everything. About joining the wagon train in Missouri, about the long journey west, about the 3 men who had started paying too much attention to her a week before everything fell apart. She described how they had come for her in the night, how they had dragged her away from the camp while everyone slept, how they had threatened her into silence. She described their faces, their horses, the weapons they carried, every detail she could remember. The leader had a scar, she said, touching her own cheek to indicate the placement. Right here, running from his eye to his jaw, and he wore a ring on his right hand, silver with some kind of stone. One of the others called him Dutch. Nathan's expression had grown progressively darker as she talked, but at the name his jaw tightened. Dutch Keller. You know him? I know of him, Nathan said grimly. He is wanted in 3 territories for robbery and murder. If he is running with a gang now, that explains a lot. He looked at Willa, and she saw a genuine anger in his eyes, not at her, but on her behalf. They took you because they thought you had money. When they found out you did not, they decided to get rid of you rather than risk you identifying them. They laughed, Willa said quietly, the memory still painful. When they rode away, they laughed, like it was all just a grand joke. Nathan's hands clenched into fists. I am going after them, and when I find them, they will face justice. When you find them, Willa met his eyes. Not if? Not if, Nathan confirmed. I am very good at what I do, Miss Garrison, and men like Dutch Keller always make mistakes. Over the following days, Nathan prepared for the hunt while Willa continued to recover. She found herself watching for him, looking forward to the times he stopped by to check on her progress or share a meal with the Henderson family. There was something about him that drew her, not just his physical presence, though she could not deny she found him attractive, but something deeper. A fundamental decency, a commitment to doing what was right no matter the cost. She was not the only one noticing things. Martha Henderson had seen enough of life to recognize attraction when she saw it, and she made a point of ensuring Nathan and Willa had time together, always properly chaperoned, but with enough privacy for real conversation. They talked about everything. Nathan told her about his childhood in Tennessee, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about drifting west and eventually finding his calling as a lawman. Willa told him about her father's bookshop in St. Louis, about her love of teaching, about her dreams of building something meaningful on the frontier. Why teaching? Nathan asked one evening, as they sat on the Hendersons' porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Because education changes everything, Willa said simply. I have seen what happens to children who never learn to read, who never have the chance to develop their minds. They are trapped, limited by circumstances they did not choose, but give a child books, knowledge, the ability to think critically, and suddenly the whole world opens up to them. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, and when Willa glanced at him, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. That is a beautiful way of looking at it, he said finally. My father thought so, Willa replied. He used to say that books were the most dangerous things in the world because they made people question, and questioning led to change. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was. Willa's voice softened. I miss him terribly. He would have liked you, I think. Why is that? Because you're like him in some ways, principled, stubborn about doing what is right even when it is difficult. She smiled slightly. He was always taking in students who could not afford proper schooling, giving away books to anyone who showed interest. My mother used to say he would give away the whole store if she did not stop him. Sounds like you take after him, Nathan observed. I hope so, Willa said, though I'm not sure he would be proud of how I ended up, abandoned in the desert, having to be rescued. Nathan turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Miss Garrison, Willa, what happened to you was not your fault. Those men are criminals. They prey on the vulnerable. The fact that you survived, that you kept going, even when you thought you were going to die, that takes real strength. Willa felt tears prickling at her eyes. She had been carrying so much shame, so much feeling of foolishness for putting herself in that situation, and Nathan's words struck something deep inside her. Thank you, she whispered. I mean it, Nathan said, and the conviction in his voice made her believe him. A week after Nathan had found Willa in the desert, word came from Circleville that changed everything. A rider arrived at the Henderson ranch with news that Dutch Keller's gang had struck again, this time robbing a stagecoach heading east from California. They had taken everything of value and left the passengers stranded, though thankfully no one had been seriously hurt. Nathan was preparing to ride out within the hour when Willa found him in the barn saddling his horse. You are leaving. It was not a question, but Nathan answered anyway. I have to. They're getting bolder, which means they are going to make mistakes. This is my chance to catch them. And if you do not come back? The question hung in the air between them. Nathan finished tightening the cinch on his saddle before turning to face her. I will come back. You cannot promise that, Willa said, and was surprised by the intensity of emotion in her own voice. You are hunting dangerous men. Anything could happen. Nathan stepped closer, close enough that Willa had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You are right, I cannot promise that, but I can promise that I'm going to try my hardest to make it back, because there is something here worth coming back to. Willa's breath caught. Nathan. I know it is too soon, he said quickly. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I would be lying if I said I did not care what happens to you, Willa Garrison. I would be lying if I said I did not think about you constantly, worry about you, want to know you are safe and happy. I think about you too, Willa admitted, her heart pounding. I lie awake at night replaying our conversations, wondering what might happen if you were not leaving, if circumstances were different. Then give me something to come back to, Nathan said softly. Tell me that when I return, we can see where this goes. Tell me you will wait. I will wait, Willa promised, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Just please, please be careful. Nathan reached out and took her hand, holding it gently in both of his. I will. And when I get back, we are going to have a proper conversation about this thing between us. I will hold you to that, Willa said, managing a tremulous smile. Then Nathan was mounting his horse, and Willa was watching him ride away towards Circleville and whatever dangers lay beyond. And she was left with nothing but her promise and the memory of his hand warm around hers. The days that followed were some of the longest of Willa's life. She threw herself into helping Martha around the ranch, anything to keep her mind occupied and her hands busy. She helped with cooking and mending, played with the Hendersons' younger children, even assisted Tom with some of the lighter ranch work. But no matter how busy she kept herself, part of her mind was always with Nathan, wondering where he was, if he was safe, if he would truly come back as he had promised. Martha noticed, of course. One afternoon as they worked together preparing preserves from the Henderson small orchard, she finally addressed what everyone in the household had been carefully not mentioning. You care for him, Martha said simply, not looking up from the jars she was sterilizing. Willa considered denying it, but what would be the point? Yes, she admitted. I know it is foolish. We barely know each other. Time has nothing to do with it, Martha said. I knew I was going to marry Tom Henderson the first time I saw him, and we had known each other exactly 3 hours. My mother thought I was insane. 32 years later, I'm still just as sure as I was that day. But what if he does not come back? Willa voiced the fear that had been gnawing at her. What if something happens to him? Then you will grieve, and eventually you will move forward because that is what we do, Martha said practically. But you cannot live your life based on what might happen, Willa. Fear is no way to make decisions. If you care for Nathan Aldridge, then you hold on to that and you hope and you wait. And if he cares for you the way I think he does, he will move heaven and earth to get back to you. Willa wanted desperately to believe that. But the days stretched into weeks, and still there was no word from Nathan. No one in Circleville had heard anything either. Martha's son rode into town regularly and always came back with no news, which somehow felt worse than bad news. She tried to keep her spirits up, tried to maintain hope, but it grew increasingly difficult. At night, she lay awake, imagining all the terrible things that could have happened. Dutch Keller was a known killer. What if Nathan had caught up with the gang and been outnumbered? What if he was lying injured somewhere with no one to help him? What if he was already dead and she was waiting for someone who would never return? The not knowing was its own special torture. 3 weeks after Nathan had ridden away, Willa finally accepted that she could not simply wait at the Henderson Ranch indefinitely. She needed to make plans for her own future, regardless of whether Nathan was part of it. The teaching position in California was long gone. The wagon train would have reached its destination weeks ago, but there were other options. Circleville needed a schoolteacher. Martha had mentioned it several times, though she had been careful not to push. Willa was discussing the possibility with Martha one morning when they heard horses approaching. Tom was in the fields and his sons were with him. So Martha grabbed the rifle she kept by the door, while Willa peered cautiously through the window. Then her heart nearly stopped. Because there, riding up the path to the house, was Nathan Aldridge. He was dusty and trail-worn, with a week's worth of beard shadowing his jaw, but he was alive and whole and there. Willa did not remember moving, but suddenly she was through the door and running toward him, all propriety forgotten. Nathan dismounted quickly and caught her as she threw herself at him, his arms wrapping around her tightly. "You came back," she gasped against his chest. "You came back." "I promised, did I not?" Nathan's voice was rough with emotion. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Willa, if you ever leave for that long without word again, I will kill you myself, sure," Willa said. And then she was kissing him, or he was kissing her. Or they were kissing each other. And it did not matter because all that mattered was that he was here and safe and real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Martha was standing on the porch with her arms crossed and a knowing smile on her face. "Well, I will go put on coffee then, shall I? I suspect we're going to be hearing quite a story." Over coffee and the lunch, Martha insisted Nathan eat before he told them anything. Nathan recounted the past 3 weeks. He had tracked Dutch Keller's gang across 3 counties, following the trail of their robberies and getting closer each time. In a town called Cedar City, he had finally caught up with them and, with the help of the local sheriff, had managed to arrest the entire gang in a pre-dawn raid. "No one was killed," Nathan said, seeing the concern in Willa's eyes. "A few shots fired, but everyone walked away. Dutch and his men are in the territorial prison now awaiting trial. And I made sure to include attempted murder charges for what they did to you." "So it is over," Willa said, feeling something inside her finally unclench. "They cannot hurt anyone else." "It is over," Nathan confirmed. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Which brings me to what I want to talk to you about." Willa's heart started beating faster. "All right." Nathan glanced at Martha, who took the hint and excused herself, claiming she had work to do in the garden. Once they were alone, Nathan seemed momentarily at a loss for words, which Willa found endearing coming from a man who was normally so confident. "I have been thinking," he started, "these past 3 weeks, tracking those men, sleeping on the ground, doing all the things I have done 1,000 times before, and the whole time all I could think about was getting back here, back to you." "Nathan." "Let me finish," he said gently. "I am a marshal. That means I move around a lot, go where the work takes me. It is not an easy life, and it is not always a safe one. But Circleville needs a full-time lawman. The circuit judge has been after me for months to settle there permanently, and I am thinking maybe it is time I stopped wandering." Willa could barely breathe. "What are you saying?" I am saying that I want to build something, Nathan said, a real life, in one place, with one person. I am saying that I have fallen in love with a school teacher from Missouri who is brave and smart and beautiful, and I want to know if she might feel the same way about a lawman from Tennessee who is too stubborn for his own good. Tears spilled down Willa's cheeks, but she was smiling. I might know something about that. In fact, that school teacher has been half out of her mind worrying about that lawman for 3 solid weeks. So that is a yes? That is definitely a yes, Willa laughed through her tears. I love you, Nathan Aldridge. I have probably loved you since you gave me water in the desert and looked at me like I was a person worth saving. You are worth everything, Nathan said fiercely. He stood and came around the table, pulling her up into his arms. Every good thing I could possibly give you, and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. They were married 2 months later in Circleville's small church, with most of the town in attendance. Martha Henderson cried happy tears and claimed she had known from the first day. Tom Henderson walked Willa down the aisle, since her own father could not be there. Nathan's marshal friends came from 3 territories to celebrate, and the local sheriff presented them with a beautiful set of dishes as a wedding gift. Willa wore a simple white dress that Martha and her daughters had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Nathan wore his best suit and could not stop looking at his bride with wonder in his eyes. When the minister asked if he took this woman to be his lawfully wedded wife, Nathan's "I do" rang out clear and strong, and when Willa gave her own vow, her voice was steady and sure. They kissed to enthusiastic applause, and then there was dancing and food and celebration late into the evening. Willa danced with Nathan, with Tom Henderson, with what felt like every man in Circleville, but she always came back to Nathan, to the man who had saved her life, and then given her a reason to truly live it. Nathan had found them a house on the edge of town, a small but sturdy place with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that got good morning light. It was not much, but it was theirs, and Willa had never been happier than when Nathan carried her over the threshold that night and set her down gently in their own home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Aldridge," he murmured against her hair. "Home?" Willa repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, this is home." That first year of marriage was not without its challenges. Nathan's work as Circleville's marshal was demanding and sometimes dangerous. There were nights when Willa lay awake worrying, nights when Nathan came home with bruises or worse, but there were far more nights when he came home safe, when they sat together on their small porch watching the stars come out over the desert, when they talked about their days and their dreams and the future they were building together. Willa took the position as Circleville's schoolteacher and threw herself into the work with passion. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic to children ranging from 6 to 16, and she loved every challenging, exhausting moment of it. Some of her students came from families who had never had any formal education, and watching their faces light up when they successfully read their first sentence or solved a difficult problem never got old. Nathan was proud of her work, and he made sure everyone in town knew it. He attended every school program Willa organized, helped her build bookshelves for the small schoolhouse, and personally tracked down families whose children were not attending to encourage them to send their kids to school. In the evenings, they would often sit together while Willa prepared lessons and Nathan worked on his reports. Sometimes they would read aloud to each other from books Willa had managed to acquire, some sent from her sister in St. Louis, others ordered from catalogs, a few borrowed from the more established families in town. Nathan had a beautiful reading voice, deep and expressive, and Willa never tired of listening to him. Their first anniversary arrived in a blur of happiness. Nathan had arranged to take several days away from his duties, and they rode out to a spot in the Red Rock country that he had discovered during his patrols. They camped under the stars, just the 2 of them, and talked about everything and nothing. On the anniversary night itself, Nathan gave Willa a necklace he had commissioned from a jeweler in Salt Lake City, a small silver pendant in the shape of an open book. "For the teacher who changed my life," he said as he fastened it around her neck. Willa traced the pendant with her fingers, tears in her eyes. "I did not change your life. I just stumbled into it." "You did both," Nathan corrected gently, "and I thank God for it every single day." Willa kissed him then, long and sweet under the vast Utah sky, and thought about how close she had come to dying in this very desert. How different things would be if Nathan had not found her tracks, if he had started his search even a day later. The thought still had the power to make her shudder, but it also made her appreciate what they had all the more. In the second year of their marriage, Willa discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually: the missed monthly courses, the morning sickness, the way her dresses started fitting tighter around the middle. When she finally told Nathan, he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, then immediately became concerned that he might have hurt the baby. "Nathan, I am pregnant. Not made of glass," Willa said, but she was touched by his obvious joy and concern. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Willa had to give up teaching in her final months when standing for long periods became too uncomfortable. The town women rallied around her, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and casseroles so she would not have to cook. Martha Henderson came to stay with them a week before the baby was due, determined to be there for the birth. Willa's labor started on a cool October evening. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Willa was convinced she could not do it. But Martha and the midwife coached her through it, and Nathan held her hand and wiped her face with a cool cloth and told her she was the bravest person he had ever met. When their son finally arrived in the early hours of the morning, red-faced and squalling, Willa burst into tears at the sight of him. Nathan cut the cord with shaking hands, and then the midwife was placing the baby in Willa's arms, and she was looking down at the tiny, perfect face of her child. "He is beautiful," Nathan whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "Willa, he is perfect." They named him Samuel Thomas Aldridge, after Willa's father and Tom Henderson. Little Sam had Nathan's dark hair and what would eventually become Willa's green eyes, and from the very beginning he had a strong personality. He was a good baby overall, but when he wanted something, he made his desires known loudly and persistently. Nathan took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He would walk the floor with Sam at night when the baby was fussy, singing old Tennessee songs in his deep voice until Sam quieted. He built a cradle with his own hands, sturdy and beautiful, and insisted on keeping it right next to their bed so they could hear if Sam needed anything. He was fiercely protective of both Willa and the baby, and more than one drunk cowboy sobered up quickly when Marshal Aldridge made it clear that disturbing his family's peace would not be tolerated. Willa returned to teaching when Sam was 6 months old, bringing the baby with her to school. The older girls took turns helping watch him while Willa taught, and Sam grew up surrounded by books and learning. He was walking by 10 months, talking in full sentences by 2 years, and reading simple words by 3. Nathan joked that they were raising a scholar, but Willa could see the pride in his eyes when Sam showed off some new accomplishment. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Nathan's work continued to be demanding, but was rarely dangerous now that the worst outlaws had been cleared from the region. Willa's school grew as more families settled in and around Circleville. Sam thrived, growing from a baby to a curious, energetic toddler who wanted to know everything about everything. When Sam was 3, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and their daughter was born on a beautiful spring morning with minimal fuss. They named her Grace Eleanor Aldridge, and she was as calm and easygoing as her brother had been demanding and intense. With 2 children, the little house on the edge of town felt cramped, so Nathan and some friends built an addition, 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Willa planted a garden and filled the house with books and the sounds of children's laughter. Nathan built a swing in the old oak tree in the yard, and on summer evenings they would sit on the porch watching Sam push his sister on the swing while the sun set over the desert. The years passed in a blur of school programs and birthday parties, of children's illnesses and skinned knees, of quiet evenings when Nathan and Willa would finally get both children to bed and collapse together on the sofa. Exhausted, but happy. They celebrated anniversaries and holidays, They weathered hard times, drought years when money was tight, winters when illness swept through the town, moments when Nathan's work put him in danger and Willa had to wait anxiously for him to come home safe. But through it all, their love remained constant and strong. Nathan still looked at Willa the way he had in those early days, with wonder and appreciation. Willa still felt her heart skip when Nathan walked through the door at the end of the day. They still talked for hours, still laughed together, still found ways to show each other how much they cared. When Sam was 8 and Grace was 5, Willa took them to visit her sister in St. Louis. It was Sam's first time on a train and Grace's first time out of Utah, and both children were wild with excitement. Willa's sister Caroline had married a banker and lived in a fine house in the city, and her children were polite and well-mannered in a way that made Willa's rough and tumble frontier kids seem almost feral by comparison. But Caroline loved Sam and Grace immediately, and they loved their city cousins despite the differences. The visit lasted 2 weeks, and by the end, Willa was ready to return home. She had loved St. Louis once, but it felt small and confining now compared to the wide open spaces of Utah. The noise and crowds and constant bustle exhausted her. She found herself longing for her small house, her schoolroom, the desert views she saw every morning. Most of all, she missed Nathan. He had stayed behind to keep working, and though they exchanged letters almost daily, it was not the same as being together. When the train finally pulled into the Circleville station and Willa saw Nathan waiting on the platform, she felt such a surge of love and relief that she nearly cried. Nathan swept her into his arms the moment she stepped off the train, holding her tightly while the children danced around them, demanding attention. "I missed you," he said into her hair. "The house was too quiet without you all." "We missed you too," Willa replied, "but we are home now. We are all home." As the children grew older, they developed distinct personalities. Sam was serious and studious like his mother, always with his nose in a book, fascinated by history and science. He announced at age 10 that he wanted to be a doctor, and from that point on, every bit of his energy went toward that goal. He studied harder than any student Willa had ever taught, and she knew with certainty that he would achieve his dream. Grace was more like Nathan, practical, action-oriented, with a strong sense of justice and fairness. She was constantly organizing the other children, mediating their disputes, making sure everyone played by the rules. Nathan joked that she would make a fine marshal one day, but Willa suspected Grace would find her own path, something uniquely her own. When Sam was 15, a doctor passing through Circleville spent an afternoon with him, answering questions and showing him medical instruments. The doctor was so impressed with Sam's knowledge and dedication that he offered to sponsor Sam's medical education when the time came. It was an incredible opportunity, but it would mean Sam leaving home to study in Denver or perhaps even back east. The thought of Sam leaving filled Willa with conflicting emotions. She was proud beyond measure of what her son had accomplished and the man he was becoming. But the idea of him being so far away, of not seeing him every day, made her heart ache. She tried not to show it, not wanting to burden Sam with her feelings, but Nathan knew her too well. "He is supposed to leave," Nathan said gently one night after Sam had gone to bed. They were sitting on the porch as they so often did, watching the stars. "That is what we raised him to do, to have opportunities, to chase his dreams. Just because we love having him here does not mean we should hold him back." "I know," Willa said, wiping at her eyes. "I know you are right. It is just hard. He is my baby." "He will always be your baby," Nathan said, pulling her close, "just like Grace will always be your baby, even when she is 50 years old with babies of her own. Being a parent means loving them enough to let them fly." Willa nodded, knowing he was right, trying to find peace with it. And when Sam did eventually leave for medical school 3 years later, Willa managed to send him off with a smile and encouragement rather than tears, saving those for later when Nathan held her while she cried. But Grace was still home, and there was still the school to run. And there was still Nathan, always Nathan, her rock and her love and her partner in everything. They had been married 20 years now, and Willa loved him more than she had thought possible to love another person. He was graying at the temples and had lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the desert sun, but to her he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. Nathan had never stopped being marshal of Circleville. Though he had trained several deputies over the years to help with the work, he was respected throughout the territory as a fair but firm lawman, the person people called when there was trouble. But he always made it clear that his family came first, and he turned down multiple offers of positions in bigger towns with better pay because Willa and the children were happy in Circleville. One evening when Willa was 50 and Nathan was 54, they were sitting on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. Grace was married now, living in Salt Lake City with her husband who worked for the railroad, pregnant with Willa and Nathan's first grandchild. Sam was finishing his medical residency in Denver and talking about opening a practice in a small Colorado town that reminded him of home. "We did all right, did we not?" Nathan said suddenly. Willa looked at him, at the man who had saved her life all those years ago in the desert. "We did better than all right. We did wonderfully." "I still think about that day sometimes," Nathan admitted. "What if I had not found you? What if I had given up searching an hour earlier or gone in a different direction?" "But you did not," Willa said firmly. "You found me. You saved me. And then you loved me, and you built this beautiful life with me, and you gave me everything I never knew I needed." "You gave me just as much," Nathan said, taking her hand. His hands were calloused and scarred from years of hard work, but his touch was still gentle. "Before you, I was just drifting. I had a job, but I did not have a life. You changed everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors fade from the sky. Then Willa said, "Do you remember what you told me the day you left to hunt Dutch Keller? You said there was something worth coming back to." "I remember." "You were right," Willa said. "There was something worth coming back to. There still is. There always will be." Nathan turned and kissed her, soft and sweet and familiar. "Always," he agreed, "until the day I die, and probably beyond that too." The grandchildren started arriving the following year. Grace had a boy first, then a girl. Sam married a nurse he met at the hospital and brought her home to meet the family, and Willa loved her immediately. They had twin boys 2 years later, and suddenly Willa and Nathan's quiet house was filled with noise and chaos whenever the grandchildren visited. Nathan turned out to be a wonderful grandfather, patient and playful in a way that surprised Willa despite everything she knew about him. He built toys and told stories and let the children climb all over him while he pretended to be a mountain or a horse or whatever the game required. Watching him with their grandchildren, Willa's heart felt so full, she thought it might burst. Time moved forward as it always does. Nathan eventually retired from being marshal, passing his badge to a younger man he had trained who would carry on the work. Willa taught until she was 65, then handed her school over to a young woman fresh from teacher's college who reminded Willa of herself at that age, idealistic, passionate, determined to make a difference. They had more time together then. Time to travel and visit their children and grandchildren, time to simply be together without the demands of work constantly pulling at them. They took trips to places they had always wanted to see: the California coast, the Grand Canyon, even back to Tennessee so Nathan could show Willa where he had grown up. But they always came back to Circleville, to the little house that had grown and changed over the years but was still fundamentally theirs, to the desert views and the familiar faces and the life they had built. This was home. This would always be home. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren descended on Circleville for a massive celebration. Sam brought his whole family from Colorado. Grace brought hers from Salt Lake City. The town threw a party in the church hall, and it seemed like everyone Willa and Nathan had ever known was there to celebrate with them. There were speeches and toasts. Martha Henderson's daughter spoke about how her mother had always said Nathan and Willa were the greatest love story she had ever witnessed. The current marshal talked about what an honor it was to follow in Nathan's footsteps. Several of Willa's former students, now grown with children of their own, spoke about how she had changed their lives by teaching them to read and think and dream. When it was Nathan's turn to speak, he stood and pulled Willa up beside him. 40 years ago, he said, I found a woman in the desert who was supposed to die there, but she did not die. She survived, and she fought, and she became the center of my entire world. Everything good in my life traces back to that day when I found her tracks before they faded. Willa Aldridge, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I love you more today than I did 40 years ago, which I would not have thought possible. Here is to 40 more years. Everyone cheered and applauded, but Willa barely heard them. She was looking at Nathan, at the man she loved, feeling the same flutter in her chest she had felt all those years ago. I love you too, she said, always and forever. They lived many more good years together. They watched their grandchildren grow and their great-grandchildren arrive. They celebrated more anniversaries and birthdays. They grew older together, their hair turning white, their movements slower, but their love never diminishing. Nathan lived to be 82, and when he finally passed peacefully in his sleep with Willa holding his hand, she felt as though part of her soul had been torn away. The funeral was huge. People came from all over Utah and beyond to pay their respects to the marshal who had served his community so faithfully for so many years. But through her grief, Willa took comfort in knowing that they had had a good life, a full life, a life worth living. She lived 5 more years without him, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, still sharp-minded and active even as her body grew frail. She spent her final years writing down the story of her life, their life, so that future generations would know about the cowboy who had saved the schoolteacher in the desert, and the love story that had grown from that moment. When Willa passed at the age of 87, she was laid to rest beside Nathan in the Circleville Cemetery, under the shade of a cottonwood tree with a view of the desert where their story had begun. Her children and grandchildren gathered around as the minister spoke about a life well lived and a love that had lasted through everything. Sam read from his mother's writings, the story she had recorded. They left her in the desert with no horse or water. The cowboy found her tracks before they faded, and from that moment of rescue grew a love story that spanned decades, produced children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, touched countless lives, and proved that even in the harshest circumstances, even when all seems lost, there is always hope. There is always the possibility that someone will find you. There's always the chance that your worst day might lead to your best life. I was supposed to die in that desert, but instead I lived and loved and built something beautiful, and I am grateful for every single moment. On Willa's gravestone, beneath her name and dates, Nathan's children had inscribed, "She was worth finding." On Nathan's gravestone, they had inscribed, "He never stopped looking for those who needed him." And between the 2 stones, their children planted a desert rose, hardy and beautiful, that bloomed year after year, a living testament to the love that had started when a marshal found a schoolteacher's tracks in the sand and chose to follow them. Their story became legend in Circleville, passed down through generations, the tale of the cowboy and the schoolteacher, of rescue and love, and a life built together against all odds. Parents told it to their children, who told it to their children, and through the telling, Nathan and Willa lived on, their love story as eternal as the desert itself. And if you go to Circleville, Utah today, you can still see their graves under the cottonwood tree, still see the desert rose blooming between them. And you can still hear the story of how they left her in the desert with no horse or water, how the cowboy found her tracks before they faded, and how that single moment of grace and determination changed 2 lives forever and created a legacy of love that would never fade, no matter how much time passed or how much the world changed around it. It was a love that proved stronger than death, deeper than the desert, and more lasting than the stones that marked where they finally rested together. It was, simply put, a love worth finding and a love worth keeping, and it all started with tracks in the sand that one determined man refused to let disappear into the wind.